Okay, welcome back to our reading and discussion of Charles Dickens's novel A Christmas Carol. Today we're going to be looking at Stave 2 and the appearance of the first of the three spirits. Now, I'm going to read through the whole of this extract first before going back and looking at some of the key quotations. So if you don't need to listen to the text being read aloud, I'll put the time at which we begin the analysis in the description underneath this video, and you can just fast forward to the quotation analysis if that's what you need. So I'm going to jump straight in, read through the whole extract, and then we'll analyse together. So, Stave 2, the first of the three spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavouring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighbouring church struck the 4 quarters, so he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went on from 6 to 7, and from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, then stopped. 12! It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works. 12! He touched the spring of his repeater to correct this most preposterous clock. Its rapid little pulse beat 12 and stopped. Why, it isn't possible, said Scrooge, that I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, and this is 12 at noon. The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost off with the sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could make out was that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and that there was no noise of people running to and fro and making a great stir, as there unquestionably would have been if night had beaten off bright day and taken possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 3 days after sight of this first exchange of pay to Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge or his order and so forth would have become a mere United States security if there were no days to count by. Scrooge went to bed again, and thought and thought and thought it over and over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavoured not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again like a strong spring released to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone 3 quarters more, when he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could go no more to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The quarter was so long that he was more than once convinced he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously, and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his listening ear. Ding-dong. 1/4 past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding-dong. 1/2 past, said Scrooge. Ding-dong. 1/4 to it, said Scrooge. Ding-dong. The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly, and nothing else. He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it did now with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand. Not the curtains at his feet, nor the curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, starting up into a half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them, as close to it as I am now to you, and I am standing in the spirit at your elbow. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium which gave him the appearance of having receded from the view, and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were, like those upper members, bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and, in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap which it now held under its arm. Even this, though, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not its strangest quality, for as its belt sparkled and glittered, now in one part and now in another, and what was light one instant at another time was dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, now with one leg, now with 20 legs, now a pair of legs without a head, now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts no outline would be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted away. And in the very wonder of this, it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am." The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being so close beside him, it were at a distance. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, your past." Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and begged him to be covered. "What!" exclaimed the ghost. "Would you so soon put out with worldly hands the light I give? Is it not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap, and force me through whole trains of years to wear it low upon my brow?" Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intention to offend, or any knowledge of having wilfully bonneted the spirit at any period of his life. He then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. "Your welfare," said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help thinking that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed." It put out its strong hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise, and walk with me." It would have been in vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, that bed was warm, and the thermometer a long way below freezing, that he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown, and nightcap, and that he had a cold upon him at that time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped his robe in supplication. "I am a mortal," Scrooge remonstrated, "and liable to fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." Okay, and we'll finish there. So I'm just going to be particularly focusing on the appearance of the ghost of Christmas past, because Dickens describes this in a really contradictory and unusual way, and this is all particularly symbolic when we consider its purpose in Scrooge's life and in his redemption. So first of all, we have to look at the fact that it is described as looking like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man. So, Dickens begins to describe the ghost using juxtaposition, as the ghost is going to take Scrooge back to revisit his childhood. Its combination of appearances, both looking childlike and aged, create this link between Scrooge's youth and his old age. Not only that, but we have this description of its hair hanging down its neck and down its back, which is white as if with age, but the face is unwrinkled. So again, we have this combination of characteristics associated with youth, associated with old age, and this creates this mixture of time periods that it comes to represent, because it represents everything from Scrooge's past, everything up until this moment. So this blending of different features illustrates the fact that it represents a big long span of Scrooge's life. If we look at the description of its body, the arms were long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Remember that a little bit later on, because when the ghost takes Scrooge's hand, he finds that he can't resist it. So despite its childlike and aged appearance at the same time, it seems to have supernatural strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were like those upper members bare. So we have this slight sense of innocence as well. It's described with bare feet. It wore a tunic of the purest white. Now, you will have thought about colour symbolism with some of the other texts that you've studied. As I'm sure you know, the colour white is used to symbolise innocence, and we often associate innocence with childhood. As you know, this ghost is going to take Scrooge back into his childhood when he was a more innocent individual. And if we look at the way that it's dressed, it's carrying this branch of fresh green holly, which seems to represent Christmas time, but on its dress, on this tunic, it's trimmed with summer flowers. So the items that it's carrying and the things that it's wearing also represent a combination of different time periods, in this case, a combination of seasons. But the strangest thing about it is this bright jet of light springing from the top of its head. And this light, we might think that it symbolises innocence, we might think it symbolises goodness. It also, importantly, symbolises truth. This light that the ghost pours from it is going to help to illuminate the truth about Scrooge's life. It's going to make it clear and easy for him to see. If you think about the fog that fills the London streets that creates a lack of clarity, this light is going to shine through Scrooge's dark and dismal and murky kind of present, and it's going to make his life much clearer for him to understand. The ghost also seems to resemble a candle. If you think about the fact that it carries this extinguisher for a cap and it has this bright light at its head like a flame, we might also think of this association with the ghost as looking candle-like, as being symbolic of hope. This creature's appearance is symbolic of hope. In this case, maybe the hope that Scrooge can be redeemed, that his soul can be saved. So if this light shining from the ghost's head represents truth and goodness, why does it carry this extinguisher, something that would snuff that light out? Well, if this extinguisher can be used to snuff out the light, Scrooge's later request for the ghost to put out this light maybe suggests the idea that he prefers to remain in darkness, that he's not ready to face up to this truth, or that he finds it unpleasant to confront. He prefers to remain in darkness and ignorance, not really thinking about his sinful ways. If we look down at the fact that the figure is continually changing, it fluctuates, it changes in its distinctness. So because of its sparkling belt and this light pouring from it, parts of it are lit up at different times, so parts of its body can be seen. And it seems to at some points have 20 legs, or a pair of legs without a head without a body. So this ghost's frequently changing appearance could reflect the idea that it represents many memories and many people from Scrooge's past. We're going to encounter lots of individuals that are important to Scrooge from his past, from his history, and this ghost kind of represents an amalgamation, a combination of multiple individuals. Looking at the way in which Scrooge responds to it, he says, "Who and what are you?" So he's kind of characteristically hostile and rude and unpleasant. And we might think, this is just in character for him. It shows that he speaks to the ghost as rudely as he does to, say, Bob Cratchit or anyone else. But it also implies that he believes he should have some control and authority over the situation that he's in. He's quite commanding, he's demanding. And this suggests that he's trying to establish himself as having some power in this situation, when really we know he doesn't have very much. He's being subjected to supernatural occurrences. And moving on though, he also asks the spirit to cover the light that's coming from its head. And we talked about that light as representing truth, so this seems to suggest that Scrooge prefers to hide from the truth. He begs for that light to be covered up. So he's asking the ghost to hide its light, potentially representing this idea that he prefers not to see things too clearly because the truth is quite hard to acknowledge and to accept. The ghost, however, is quite alarmed and shocked by this. He says, "What?" exclaimed the ghost. And the use of that exclamative "what" suggests that the ghost appears astonished, almost offended by this suggestion. Although Scrooge says he doesn't mean to offend. Moving on, he asks the ghost why it has come, and the ghost says, "Your welfare," meaning your well-being. "I've come to look after you." And Scrooge thinks to himself, although doesn't say it, that a night of unbroken rest would have been more conducive to that end. So if the ghost really wanted to help him, it should have let him have a good night's sleep. However, the ghost hears Scrooge's thoughts. So he thinks a good night's sleep would be better for his welfare, for his well-being, than being visited by these ghosts. But the ghost immediately says, "Your reclamation then, take heed." Your reclamation means you're claiming back. "I've come to reclaim you, I've come to get you back." So he explains he isn't just there for Scrooge's welfare, but for his reclamation, the claiming back of his soul for good. Okay, one last quotation then. We'll just look at the way in which the ghost touches Scrooge, because as he goes to draw him out through the window to take him away through this window on this first journey, the grasp that he clutches Scrooge's hand with, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. And think back to that uncommon strength that the ghost is described as having previously. He's described as being unnaturally strong, but he's gentle as well. And this line could also suggest perhaps the fact that Scrooge understands why the ghost is there. The ghost is there to help save his soul from the same fate as Marley. So he's not going to try and resist the ghost, he's going to go along with what the ghost wants from him. Okay, I hope that that's been useful. I tried to keep that a little bit quicker for you today, and this is kind of the way we're going to proceed. We'll read first and then analyse the quotations, so you can just jump to the part that's the most relevant for you. I hope that that's been useful and helped you understand the importance of this particular scene. Okay, we'll continue next time to find out where Scrooge is taken by the ghost of Christmas past. Thanks for listening.